will not be like the professor who traveled around the country in a car and with chauffeur. And the chauffeur always sat in the audience. One day the chauffeur said to him, "You know, I think that I have heard that lecture of yours 1,000 times. And I could give it just as well as you do." The professor said, "All right, you give the lecture tonight. I will dress up in your chauffeur's uniform and sit in the audience." The chauffeur gave a perfect lecture. But at the end, a hand went up. There's a question that I should like to ask you. When you mix that H2SO4 with an NaCl2 and then compare it with the photographic plates of the sun, how do you get the equation E equals m over c squared? He said, "That's the most stupid question that I ever heard in my life. And to show you how stupid it is, I'm going to ask my chauffeur to answer it." The subject of this evening's meditation will be choice. I will try to bring home to you the supreme alternatives that are before us. The alternatives of our eternal destiny. And I will begin by giving you 2 examples of choice. Because after all, our heaven or hell is before us every day. But there come great moments, too, when we make decisions for much of our life. One of these stories will be taken from Paris and the other from London. And both of them were my own experiences. I had gone down from Brussels to Paris to preach a sermon on the second Sunday of February. And I stayed in a small hotel. There was an Englishman playing the piano in an adjoining room and playing it well. I complimented him, and then I asked him if he would like to go out for dinner. He said, "I've never talked to a priest before in my life." Well, we're just like anyone else. You stick me with a pin, I will jump too. So we sat down to table in this small restaurant, and he said, "Do you ever have questions to answer? This is my problem. I have never met in my life one good man or one good woman." I thanked him for the compliment, and then he went on. He said, "Now this coming 11th of February, over there at that table, there was a lady trying to break a lump of sugar in a cup of coffee. She couldn't do it, so I went over and broke the lump for her. And she told me how mean her husband was to her. I asked her to come to live with me. Well, she did, and I get tired of them all after about 12 months. So he said this morning, I bundled up all of her clothes. I left them with the concierge, but she anticipated my move, and she gave me this note. Dear puppy, if you refuse to continue living with me until our anniversary, the 11th of February, I shall commit suicide by throwing myself into the Seine. Now, may I permit her to live with me to prevent suicide? I said, no, you may not do evil that good may come from it, and furthermore, she will not commit suicide. It got to be about 11 o'clock at night. He said, I will walk you back to the hotel. I'm not going to the hotel. I'm going to Montmartre. He said, I was just beginning to think that maybe you were all right. And now you tell me you're going up to that hellhole. Well, I said, there's something else on the hill of Montmartre besides dives. There's a great basilica there, the Basilica of the Sacred Heart. And every night for over 50 years, there are 1,000 men in prayer all night long. I induced him to come with me. He said, how long? I said, I will leave when you are ready to leave, though I intend to stay all night. He made no move to go until the sun came up over Paris and I read Mass. And walking down the hill of Montmartre, he said, will you stay in Paris and teach me to be good? It's the first time in my life I've ever contacted goodness. I agreed to meet him that night in his courtyard at 8 o'clock. He came in with a woman, not the one that was involved in the story. And he said, we will go out to dinner, the three of us. And I said, no, this is not a social evening. You must make a choice. Either you are going out with that woman or you are going out with me. He walked up and down the courtyard a couple of times and came back and said, well, Father, I think that I'll go out with her. And that's the end of the story. The choice was made after having received a great grace. Please God, before he dies, he will recall that night at Montmartre. That was a choice for evil. Another kind of choice. I spent about 7 or 8 years of my life in all in a parish in London, in the Soho Square district. I opened the church door this particular morning. It was a cold January morning, heavy London fog, and a limp figure fell in, a young woman. I said, how did you happen to be here? Where am I, Father? I said, oh, Father? Yes, she said, I used to be a Catholic, but not anymore. You were drunk. Yes, she said, I was drunk. Well, I said, men drink because they like the stuff. Women drink because they don't like something else. What were you running away from? She said, 3 men. I was in love with each of them and they were beginning to find it out. And so I got drunk. What is your name? And pointing to a billboard opposite the church on the walls of the Cross and Blackwell Jam office, I said, is that your picture over there? Yes, I'm leading lady in that musical comedy. Made a cup of coffee for her, for she was frozen from the night exposure. She said, thanks. I said, no, come back this afternoon and thank me. She said, I will on one condition, that you do not ask me to go to confession. I said, very well, I shall not ask you to go to confession. She said, I want you to promise me faithfully that you will not ask me to go to confession. I said, I promise you faithfully that I will not ask you to go to confession. She came back that afternoon before matinee, and I said, we have 2 paintings in this church that are very notable. Would you like to see them? As I took her down the side aisle of the church, I pushed her into a confessional. I always keep my promises. 2 years later, I gave her her veil as a nun in the Convent of Adoration, where she is to this very hour. So that cold January morning, another choice had to be made, and it was a choice for good. That is a picture of ourselves. We know this choice is before us. We're striving. The flesh weighs upon us, old habits, weakness of will. But like these characters, we hope for an upsurge from all that is cold and inert. The second statue, the statue of King David. A sculptor in Florence tried to make a statue, and he ruined it. But it was a beautiful piece of Carrara marble. One day Michelangelo passed by and saw that marble, asked that it be brought to his studio, applied his genius, his inspiration, and his skill, and brought out of it the immortal statue of David. And so though our lives have been spoiled, though they may have been hacked and ruined by circumstances or other artists, the great finger and hand of God can mold us into immortality. And finally, the Pietà. Here is a young woman, having seen her divine Son crucified, and then taken down and put in her lap as a kind of a drained chalice. And yet she's not broken with grief. There's not sadness. There is peace. There is resignation to God's will. An interior calm. For she sees that sacrifice was part of the divine message to her Son and to herself. And as we struggle to overcome all of the alien influences that there are in the world, those we will talk about too, as we struggle to overcome them, we're never to be cast down by trials, by discipline, by mortification. We have God with us. Christ is in our souls. You're good people. You would not be here if you were not good. And even though you're not as good as you would want to be, you have come here because you want to be better. There's a deep yearning, in the American soul for goodness and spirituality. And you manifest it. And if you bear with me during these talks, I will lead you step by step to inner peace, to inner joy and consolation. Thank you, and God love you.